Hi, I'm Grant, this is Dad Crafted, and this is a workbench I made for under $100 out of nothing but 2x4's and wood glue. Maybe a couple screws. Alright, let's go. I started off by getting a bunch of 2x4's from the local big box store. To be precise, I bought 26 8-footers. At a little over $2.50 a piece, this ran me about $70, and that's the bulk of the cost of this project. Now you're seeing me run all these 2x4's through the planer. If you don't own a planer and you want to do a project like this, I would strongly recommend just getting one. I've been into woodworking for over 10 years, and I should have bought one of these a long time ago. Typically 2x4's you get from the big box stores are pretty rough, so I took off a little under 1/4 of an inch off each board, just making sure both sides of the boards were perfectly smooth and that we were pretty consistent through all 26 of them. What you're seeing is pretty sped up, so getting all these boards to a milled and ready state is pretty tedious and time consuming. But once I got through this, it was time to cut most of the boards that would form the length of the tabletop. Honestly, this doesn't have to be perfect because once I get the whole thing assembled, I'm probably going to run a circular saw over each end of the table saw and then just flush it up that way, because when I glue all these together, it's probably going to be uneven anyway. After cutting the tabletop boards, I ended up with 21 boards that were 6 feet long. I used Tightbond II to glue everything up. Just put excess glue on each board and then use a small paint roller to roll everything on and make sure the entire surface is covered. Then I just sandwiched everything together and used a bunch of clamps to get everything nice and tight. I chose to do 3 sections of 7 boards just so I'd be able to get each section actually through the planer. My planer has a limit of 12-inch width, so once these were glued up, I wanted to run each section through the planer, and then we'll come back and we'll glue the 3 sections together to form the entire top. This part's a 2-person job because these top sections are pretty heavy and you don't really want to risk tipping your planer over while you're running these boards through. That's my wife Jess. She's demonstrating how not to wear a mask. Again, multiple passes through the planer on both sides so that we have a nice smooth top and bottom for the workbench. Here I'm using a digital caliper just to verify that both ends of the section have the exact same width and that all 3 sections have the same width. This will help ensure that when we glue the 3 sections together, hopefully everything's pretty even. When it was time to glue the 3 sections together, I figured I better do glue on both sides of each joint. More the merrier. Now obviously I'm using clamps to squeeze everything together tight, but I also wanted to clamp the ends to keep the 3 sections as even as possible. So here I'm using some 2x4's on the top and bottom, and I'm using the wax paper in between just so that the glue won't actually glue these 2x4's to my tabletop. But essentially these are to keep the 3 sections as level and even as possible so that they don't shift when I squeeze my pipe clamps and my other clamps together to squeeze everything together. Hopefully that all makes sense. I'm not gonna move this by myself. No! Yeah, no. Good. Back to the chiropractor. Alright, let's get started on the legs. So remember, I didn't buy any posts for this project. This is all 2x4's. So I'm cutting my 2x4's down to 31.5 inches. And then I'm going to glue 3 pieces together to make up 1 post. But there is kind of a trick here, so I'm just starting with 2 pieces instead of 3. So I'm starting with some skinny posts, and I'll eventually add the other piece here in a minute, and you'll see why. I actually ran out of 2x4's that were long enough to do all these legs, so you'll see that one of the legs is made up of 2 shorter pieces just to get us to 31.5. But it's all getting glued and sandwiched together anyway, so it works just fine. So this is quite the glue up I got going on here. There's this little piece, this middle section, same thing over there. These are just the top, the bottom are just placeholders while I do the glue up. I'm not going to glue these, I'm just gluing this and this to this post that I've already glued together. Same over there. And then once those are ready, we'll cut some more mortises in here and there for these pieces that are really just keeping us off the ground so I can actually get clamps onto these right now. Tons of fun. Once I get everything clamped, I just remove those skirt spacer pieces out of the way, just in case any squeeze out happens so that those don't end up glued to the post yet. Once dry, I just flip over and then do the other side. And then once this is all dry, I just basically repeat this whole process to glue up my other 2 leg posts. Back to the planer to get all 4 legs nice and smooth. There's a whole bunch of sanding done too, but we'll skip all that. So let's move on to the legs. Here I'm adjusting the blade of the table saw to be the same width as my plain down 2x4's. Due to my fancy glue up, I've already got mortises made for the skirt runners that are going to be on the front and the back of the workbench. But here I'm making the cuts for the sides of the workbench so that I can have the shorter skirt runners that are about 2 feet long go between the legs and connect them that way as well. Make as many quick cuts as possible and then just use a chisel to clean it all up. And then I'm going to repeat that process on each leg 2 times. Snippet, but this was a whole bunch of depressing sanding. So here I'm attaching the skirt runners, and I actually use screws for this. I could have wood glued it together. I probably should have wood glued it together, but for some reason I had in my mind that maybe I'd want this to be able to take apart someday, which becomes pointless because I ended up wood gluing dowels to fill the holes for the final product. Should have just wood glued and just avoided the screws. Here I'm using a pocket hole jig after the fact because I forgot to make my pocket holes to attach the bench top to the legs. Again, probably should have thought this through beforehand, and also again, I don't know why I decided on pocket holes. At some point I thought maybe it would make sense to remove the top, but that's never going to happen. With all that done, it was time to attach the legs to the bench top. We've got the workbench upside down to make this easier. But basically, we start with the skirt runners to form that rectangular leg base. And then once that's done, we go ahead and use those pocket holes to start screwing that base into the workbench top from the bottom. You get it. I enlisted help to get this thing flipped over. Based on the amount of 2x4's and wood glue, this thing is probably north of 250 pounds. With everything right side up, it was time to even up the sides of the table. I made a straight line across on both sides, and then I went ahead and ripped it down with the circular saw. Here I'm using an offset block to line up a piece of scrap hardboard, and that'll act as a guide rail to make a nice straight cut. blade's not deep enough to go all the way through, so after one pass, I finished cutting the rest the old-fashioned way with a pull saw. And repeat all that on side 2. For sanding, I used a belt sander first, and mainly just to clean up those seams where I glued the 3 sections together. Then I hit things with the orbital, 120 to 180 to 220. I used my palm router with a chamfer bit to soften up the edges all the way around the workbench top. Final sanding on the edges, and that's it. Thank you guys for watching. I'm stopping this video here because really I just wanted to show that you can build a workbench like this for under $100. I used about 26 2x4's for about $70 from the local box store. I used about 2.5 bottles of wood glue, $3 each, and a few screws, which you can get for a couple bucks. So we're talking around $80, $85 to put together this whole thing. I plan to do a future video where I will do several modifications to this thing, one of which will include holes for bench dogs. So that's the reason why I didn't put any stain or clear coat or anything over the top of this yet, because I want to drill all those holes and kind of sand them out before I do any of that. I also plan some modifications around probably adding some wheels, because this thing weighs a quarter ton. Probably not that much, but it's really heavy and it ain't going anywhere. So it is definitely going to be perfect as an assembly table to have in the middle of my shop, and hopefully soon some storage on this bottom side, so hopefully be able to put things like my lathe, my sander machine doohickey, my router table, things like that. If you guys have any questions or comments on how I could have done things better, I would appreciate any comments. Other than that, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time.